5 o'clock in front of me, and it's 2 o'clock. So welcome everyone to this September meeting of the Greater Cambridge Partnership Joint Assembly. So I'm going to start by inviting Democratic Services to tell me if we've had any apologies for absence.
We had apologies from Joe Sainsbury and Helen Valentine.
Thank you very much. And on to declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations to make? Yes.
Chair, there are a number of categories. I don't think any of them substantive, but in relation to progress report on the research into careers, apprenticeships, electric car sales, and Project Spring, that I need to declare my involvement with Cambridge Head and Marshall of Cambridge.
Thank you very much. Always good to have clarification. Anyone else? Okay, and remember, as happened last time, if during the course of any item you remember that you have an interest that you've forgotten about, do flag it up and we can record it in the minutes. Okay, which takes us to the minutes of the previous meeting. So we have them in front of us. I'll go through them page by page. Page 3, 4, 5, 6.
I was going to say something on to update on the Citizens Assembly change.
Yes, I'll take that at the end when we've done the accuracy, if I can do that. Yes, 7. Yes, Councillor Solomon.
So just on the third bullet there, it wasn't my recollection that Peter noted it would be hard to justify the cost if the park and ride site was only tendered as temporary. I think it was hard to justify the cost full stop. And as the travel hub is not temporary, it seems... I'd just like a clarification from Peter, if that'd be okay.
So could you tell me precisely what the clarification is for the benefit of all those of us who are a little bit in the dark, particularly for the Democratic Services officer who may have to make the alteration? Are you wanting us to put a full stop, how to justify the cost of the park and ride site full stop? Is that really what you want to say? Or?
The cost of hard to justify the cost of tunnels. Full stop. I think that was my understanding.
Okay. So deleting was only intended as a temporary project. Okay, right. Anyone else on page 7? Page 8. Page 9. Page 10. Right then, members, with that clarification, are we all content that the minutes stand as a correct record? Nods all round. And yes, Rachel is going to give us an update on the Citizens' Assembly.
It was just to take the opportunity, Chair. It was just to take the opportunity, Chair, to update Assembly members on our other Assembly, which was the Citizens' Assembly, which happened last weekend, was the first 2 days of what will be a 4-day process. We have sent you an email update, but just in case you hadn't seen that, it was to recognise really that it was halfway through. It feels like a very successful event in experimenting with a new form of democratic engagement. So you'll recall that these were participants selected through a sortition process to represent a sort of mini public of our travel to work area. 56 of the 60 people who had been recruited came along and spent 2 days debating issues with which you are very familiar as they build up to answer the question about how we reduce congestion, improve public transport and improve air quality in Greater Cambridge. So the first weekend was very much sort of understanding the context. They come back together again at the first weekend of October, where they'll get into a bit more detail on what solutions may be. Isabel, who is over there, is our lead officer on it, and so if any of you are interested to understand more about the process, do ask. But it's also, we sent you the links, it was all live, the presentations were live streamed and are now up on YouTube as well, so do take a look if you're interested. Thank you.
Very good. That concludes the item on the minutes, and go into questions from members of the public. We've received 6 public questions. All of those have been accepted under the protocol because they relate to an item on the agenda. The details of the questions have been published, and I hope they've been circulated to the Joint Assembly members, and there are copies available. We have 5 questions on item 7, Histon Road, and 1 question on item 8, Madingley Road, and I'm going to take those questions when we get to those items. On to petitions. We have received no petitions. Which takes us into item 6, the quarterly progress report. So we're going to receive presentations from officers and guests, and then we're going to have a discussion about them. So I'll start by inviting Niamh to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points to run through, after which we'll introduce some colleagues from the university who are going to talk a bit about some air pollution and congestion work that they've been doing, which Councillor Manning is overseeing, so we'll hear from them in a minute. Before we do, I thought to draw a couple of things to the Assembly's attention. Something which I think is interesting. Section 6, the proposal to fund some research that RAND Europe are doing in conjunction with Cambridge Ahead and the Combined Authority. It's really about trying to understand what gaps there are in the delivery of careers advice across actually Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. What we say here is that we think we've got our service is doing something to a point, but there is more to be done in the area, and we think this could go some way to start to identify what the gaps are, though not all the way. And if members of the board are minded to get involved, we are recommending jointly funding it with Cambridge Ahead and the Combined Authority. So if there's any comments on that, or questions, be very happy to take them. Another couple of points, Assembly members asked us to set out quite clearly the process for our relationship with projects and how they interact with Section 106 negotiations. So that's set out here on page 24, and hope members will agree that it's set out clearly and just brings a bit of clarity to how officers go about these things. We've also responded to some questions about how GCP engage in transport consultations, so we've included those from page 19 onwards. And that was all I was going to say substantively. If there's any questions on that or any other items, I'm happy to take them before we introduce Councillor Manning and colleagues.
Okay, members, given that I'm hoping that the presentation that Ian's going to introduce is going to be meaty and engaging, shall we deal with questions on any of the other items in the report first? Shall I take them section by section? Are you right, that's thank you very much for the clarification, and I'm sure we can work out exactly what it is by next time, but thanks for clarifying that. So shall we take the housing and strategic planning section first? This is pages 16 and 17. Any questions on that? The skills section, 18 and 19. Yes, I have 2 on that. So Tim, you start off first. Yep, there you go. Yeah, there you go. You have this one.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I wondered on the skills section, the little table there on page 18, whether Niamh could put that in a bit more context for us, because as far as I'm aware, the solitary commitment numerically that we made to the government inside the city deal was about achieving an extra 420 apprentices. The way it looks on the table is that after 4 years' work, we've only got 13, and that's not what I recall from what we've seen in previous years. And so I just wonder whether the table actually is doing the subject justice here, because it doesn't really say that it's an extra 420 we're trying to achieve, and it doesn't seem to take any account of the, I'm hoping, cumulative progress that we've achieved along the way. And then I did want to add to this on this section that I'm very positive about the proposition in relation to this research by RAND. I'm probably not alone in the room remembering the days that local authorities provided a careers service in schools, and this has long since fragmented and dissipated, disappeared, and in all but the largest schools I think is not terribly much resembling what used to be there. And of course it's very important because often it falls back on a mixture of teachers' own career paths to date, which aren't always representative of, well, by definition they're not going to be representative of every student that passes through, and any industry representatives that they get to meet, which obviously is very valid. But in terms of referencing people's choices about apprentices in relation to all of the other choices that people can make, having that ability to context that for students with knowledge and with information is really, really vital. And so I think benchmarking where we are, because I'm sure it's better in some schools than others, is really, really important. And I hope that not only we do this, but we also pay a lot of attention to what comes back, because it may be that we want to do some more in this area to try and achieve at least the best out of what used to exist.
Shall we take all the questions first on the skills section, and then you can answer them, wrap them all up. Noel's next, and then Nikki, and then Mike. Oh, and Ian. Right, loads on this section. Right, well, go on. What is the time?
Yeah,
Noel.
thanks. It's a bit of an overlap with Tim's comment, but looking at 6.2, if we agree to go ahead with the RAND research proposal, I'd just be interested to know what timescale they would work to. When would the research begin and conclude? Because bearing in mind the statistic there in the table there, but Tim actually elaborated on that, which has helped my query on that, because I thought March 2021 to get 420 apprenticeships done when there's 13 now would be a bit of a task. So that's why knowing the timescale of this research would be useful, because if you're going to give them, I don't know, 6 to 9 months or something, that's going to really eat into the time to go out there and recruit apprentices. Thanks.
Mike was next. Sorry, Nikki, I'll come back.
Thank you, Chair. I think I should also, there's 2 declarations of interest here, I think, which I should have nominated before. My wife, Sarah Ferguson, is Assistant Director at the County Council, and she has some responsibility for this area of work. The second declaration of interest, I used to be the Chief Executive of the Connections Service 10 years ago, and was heavily involved in careers work. And it would be fair to say anecdotal evidence from head teachers, whilst always important, has always been the case that they're not happy with the careers service that's being offered. And that's something we had to continually discuss with them. I think my point generally is that before we set off on this particular avenue, which I would welcome, we would be worth talking to the actual providers of career service rather than the head teachers before deciding whether or not it's required. I suspect they would be supportive of what you're actually offering to do, but nonetheless, I think more than just anecdotal discussions with head teachers is probably a wise move. Thank you.
I'm very grateful for that, actually, because I must say when I first read this, it did sort of strike me as an undesirable situation. But from what you're saying, it's not actually that new, and it's something that we've been dealing with for some time. That's very helpful. Thank you, Nikki.
Well, yes, it is working. Excellent. Just wanted to highlight, moving from I think Tim's comment about the number 13 not being a great number on there. 5.5 does say that 78 students have registered with the Service for Ongoing Support to secure an apprenticeship, so that's really, really pleasing to see that we've got 78 potentials coming forward. But what was the age group of those children that were engaging? Were they year 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, etc.? And I was pleased to see that we are still engaging with colleges, because it is a good start. You still get a number of 18-year-olds who finish their course still not having a clue as to what kind of career path they want. So offering them another alternative to carry on their education and work is a really good idea. And then additionally, 5.7, the list of the 9 companies that have signed the pledge. Have we gone to other companies such as pharmacies and perfumeries and things like that to ask if they would like to take on some apprenticeships?
Thank you very much. And Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would just like a little bit more clarity on the scope of the RAND work. In 6.2, I think the first bullet there, map out and quantify career advice provision in schools. That's a little vague. There's lots of schools. There's lots of different types of schools. There's state-funded schools is mentioned in the first one. Are we comparing that to the private sector? It'd just be interested. I'd like a little bit more clarity on the scope. And then the final bullet, the aim of this research project, or one of the aims, is to establish the criteria for assessing quality. Would we be hoping to then have a follow-up study where we do assess the quality, or would that be beyond our remit?
Thank you. And no more questions on skills. So, Niamh, if you could take those thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. On the 420 that lots of members have raised, you're absolutely right. I think we have reached and gone beyond that number, but we can't formally tell you that yet because we're waiting for numbers to be verified by the Department for Education. But my understanding is that we can tell you next time with some degree of confidence where we've got to since GCP came to be. So we will have more clarity to give you next time. But you're right, we'll change the table so it's clearer, because that is confusing. On the research, on the timings, I'll get back to you for certain, but they need clarity on on funding before they can kind of press go. So if we're able to give them that in the next few weeks, if the board agree to the proposition, then I think they can get going in the autumn. But I'll clarify that. On the age groups, we'll get that information from Form the Future, and assuming it doesn't breach any GDPR rules or something, we'll share it with you. And I think on the pledges, again, we'll go back to the provider and make sure that they're reaching out to as many as possible. Scope of the work, again, once the funding's agreed, we'll go back to RAND and make sure that we've got detail on that, and I'll share it with you perhaps outside of this room if you'd find that helpful. And on follow-up, I suppose my advice would be we ought to wait and see what the results are. If we find them pleasing and encouraging, then we may want to follow up and do a bit more.
Thank you very much. And Rachel would like to add a little more.
Thank you, Chair. Just to build on what Niamh was saying, I just wanted to explain why, the calculation that we've done earlier that Niamh said will reach that 420 is because you'll recall the Assembly helped us shape a new commission to go, which Form the Future subsequently won. So the calculation that we've done to date, which we think gets us to around the 420, which we said would report back to you, is more about a broader assessment, looking at numbers and what's changed in the environment since City Deal started. What we, with your agreement, decided to do was a more focused contract which went to the market, and this is now, starting to report on that, where we then decided to re-emphasise the 420, but we will be much clearer about the interventions that we have initiated as part of the Greater Cambridge Partnership that deliver a further number of apprenticeships. So it's a different a much more deliberative intervention that we're now doing as opposed to the way in which we were doing it before, which we weren't spending as much on, but was showing some shift in the environment. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Can I just clarify one point? A number of members raised the progress, the number 13. My understanding is, so the service started in March, then we had a good bit of the summer holidays. So the advice is that that number will start to grow into the autumn and after Christmas, and that seems to be the natural way that apprenticeships get secured, so I'm advised.
Thank you very much. That's encouraging. And I should draw attention to the presence at our meeting of Sarah Haywood, who is always here to answer questions on financial matters. So if any do occur to you in the next minutes, then do fire them away. Take us on to the Smart Places section. Yes, John.
Thank you. It's an advert, actually, just to remind people that on the 2nd of October we have a Cambridge Smart Places showcase in the Temberlane Hotel between 5 and 7, I think.
Thank you very much. That's much appreciated. Anything else on Smart Places? Oh, I'm so sorry, Ian. Yeah.
Me again. Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question on the data visualization. Is the work with GeoSpock, is that purely to support officers and possibly members of the Assembly, members of the board to understand the data, or is there a public element to that? Will there be a public-facing element where that the visualization can be seen by members of the public as well?
Refining the data, making sure that it's visually represented in a manner that makes sense. We will then show it to members, and then finally the intention is that it will be freely available.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to being given a GeoSpock demonstration at my request, but it hasn't been possible to set that up yet. Nikki.
Yes, I've got a question on the wayfinding point on section 9.1. Do we have any data on how the wayfinding point at the Cambridge station has been working? Do we know whether it's been well received? Because you'll know my thoughts on that in any case. And the Mill Road closure, how useful will the data be given that we had the fire on Mill Road and the roadworks also?
Do you have a microphone available?
I think hopefully this will do.
Tell the meeting who you are as well.
I'm Debbie Bondi. I am a programme manager working in Smart Places. In respect of your first question, in terms of the wayfinding at Cambridge Station, I think our evaluation so far has shown that it's actually quite mixed. Elements of it seem to be quite well used, but in some respects those are the simpler elements of it. So, for example, people looking up to see when their next bus is without pressing any buttons, simply looking up at the real-time data. Some of what I would see as slightly more complex data about how do you get to King's College or whatever, not as well used as we thought it might be. So, at the moment, we're planning what to do next, having learnt something about this, some very good things, and frankly, some things that we would change in the next iteration. We're looking for how we can, improve what's there, but also looking at other hotspots for wayfinding in the city. One of the key ones that we've been advised of is at the biomedical campus, and how we would apply it there. So that evaluation is ongoing at the moment. Okay. The second part of your question about Mill Road, as you're probably aware, we have gathered the data from the closure and are continuing to gather data now that the road is reopened. In terms of the more detailed analysis of what happened on the road and the surrounding roads, of course we've captured the dates of when the fire happened, when the gasworks started and so on. I think it's probably a little bit soon to say. I mean, in some ways, you're absolutely right. So much happened on that road with the fire, with the gasworks. It's perhaps not as pure a situation as might have otherwise been the case. However, part of the analysis work we're going to be doing between now and the end of the year is to try and see whether we can correlate with those other events. And we have already seen some kind of value from the data. I think there's a point in the report about how we've used some of the data to adjust signals and so on. So there is utility in the data, but the detailed analysis will take place over the next sort of 3 months or so. And I think we'll then be able to answer your question more fulsomely. Does that help?
Thank you. Just one anecdote is that I had a friend visiting a couple of weeks ago, and I gave him a ticket from King's Cross to Cambridge, and I said, well, when you get to Cambridge, you're on your own, but I'll let you know there's a digital wayfinding totem just outside the station, and I want your feedback on it. Anyway, I'm not going to share his feedback with you. I think it's fair to say he has a PhD in astrophysics, and I think his demands of the system were more than it was capable of supplying. So, but I passed all that information on to the team. Right then. Oh, Noel, thank you.
In the light of what you've learned from the Mill Road Bridge closure and the way there's been the pollution levels were analysed and the traffic flow changes and so on, do you see your teams developing these methodologies across the city, for future planning? And because one of the things that's coming back strongly from my division, because Mill Road is, well, half of Mill Road's in my division, is that many residents would like it to be part of a general urban plan that Mill Road, parts of Mill Road, are actually pedestrianised more fully to varying degrees. Things like having through traffic being prevented, but allowing buses and taxis through and so on. So, but my response to them is that yes, it's a great idea, and many people did benefit from the closure of the road, but the future has to be part of a broader urban development. So I'd just be interested to know if your team is thinking along those lines.
Yes, just before you do, Rachel's going to intercept that question, so save you getting into difficulties now.
So that absolutely connects with the work that we're doing on city access, as well as the spaces and movement planning guidance that is about to go out to consultation, and that's working hand in hand with our progress on city access. So as we think about how do we prioritise different modes in the city and its surrounds, is definitely part of the plan that will come back to you in December.
Thank you very much. Anything else on SMART? And thank you very much, Debbie, for your contributions. And okay, John, are you into the next section? All right, yes, transport. John.
Thank you. Well, last time I drew attention to the fact that the Fulbourn Cherry Hinton cycle way had sort of stalled. Since that meeting, I've had written confirmation that it's been suspended because of the closure of Queen Edith Way, and that work will not recommence until at least the summer next year, and will be included in the remodelling of the junction of Cherry Hinton High Street at the Robin Hood pub. As we all know, that project is years behind schedule. So, you know, we still have it down as green. It certainly was confirmed to me at least 6, maybe 2 months ago that the work has been suspended. So why it's still shown here as a forecast completion date of this year, when I was told 2 months ago it was 2020, the summer of 2020 at the earliest. And I would have thought that given that circumstance, instead of being a green, it should be a red. I mean, I do feel that with this particular scheme, we are living in Donald Trump land.
Right then, well, I'm not going to make any observations on that particular metaphor, but Eileen, you also have a question on transport.
Thank you. Back in March, the Executive Board agreed that the Oakington Rural Travel Hub should be reconsidered in an alternative place. Can we have an update on where those discussions are, or the work, and whether it will be coming back to the Assembly and Board at some point in the future?
Right, thank you very much. And Tim, you have.
Yes, on page 24 of this part of the report, I'm owning up to being the sponsor of the question that drove the contents of page 24, and I would like to welcome what has clearly been achieved there, although I suspect that many of us had hoped this existed beforehand, but getting there is good, and I guess this is now much more complicated while we have inputs to consider, both from the local transport plan from one the combined authority, the GCP and its strategy and projects, and then the county council in charge of highways. I think the only reservation I have from the way this is written is that, so it's all good stuff and all beneficial. My question hadn't only been about Section 106 contributions, which is the kind of the money collection and direction aspect of the highways input to planning authority decisions, but also I'd hope that this would be incorporating simply the highways advice on planning applications. The Highways Authority is asked and gives advice in relation to planning applications about whether they're okay or not, and I'm hoping that this means that as well as just the Section 106 money collection aspects.
Yes, and well, right, we're getting lots of interest now. Peter Topping, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and apologies for being slightly late. Came from a planning committee at South Cambridgeshire. On page 25, there's a reference to the Economic Heartland Outline Transport Strategy, which is currently in consultation mode. And what I'm asking, particularly the officers, is perhaps some assurance that the contributions that we make to the combined authorities local transport plan and the contributions that we make to the Economic Heartlands Outline Transport Strategy, that there is a sort of, that first of all we're coherent in our responses to both of those, but also that if there is any incoherence between those two bodies and their transport plans, that is something that we are made aware of, because, you know, it's difficult to keep up with all these strategies, but particularly if one of them is saying one thing and the other one is saying the other, then we need to be able to work out how do we respond to that. Thank you.
Ian, who's next?
Thank you, Chair. So on the finance table, I see Neve smiling.
I really
No,
hope
I
it
haven't,
adds
I
up
haven't
this
found
time.
a mistake this time, or a complaint. But did just want to highlight, so the Greenways budget, although it's sort of in the explanation 18.21, it's a 30k overspend. That is a doubling, and the explanation there is that it was to complete the consultations on expedited timetable. Now, my understanding was that the consultations were always supposed to be completed before the gateway review at the end of this year. So, is it not just the case that we got the budget wrong, rather than it needed expediting? Just a question.
Okay, and Heather?
Thank you. Just a brief question on point 17.3. The minimum goal of 60% of travel ought to be on buses, cycling and walking in terms of the recommendations from the CUSPE, which is great. I just wanted to make sure that when we do get further details to discuss in the next assembly, that that's actually broken down. Because obviously a recommendation of 50% buses and 5% walking, et cetera, would result in dramatically different recommendations from us versus, you know, a recommendation of 40% walking, et cetera. So it would be really interesting to be able to see some of that modeling in more detail before we start discussing that further.
It's possible we may get a little taster of where that might be going when we hear from the
Great,
presenters
thank you.
shortly. But any other questions directly on the transport section? John, again?
Sorry, just apologise for not raising this earlier, but on Cambridge South Station, can you remind me which grip stage you're at with Network Rail? Thanks.
And just before you start, Peter, we've got Christopher also wants to come in.
Just a small point, Chair, just on 17.4 and the prioritising sustainable modes of travel. I think we're missing an opportunity there to stress that sustainable needs to include practical and affordable, reliable alternatives rather than just sustainable in themselves. In other words, proper alternatives.
Okay, we'll pick up again the clarification of sustainable web. We've got Peter again. Yes, right there.
Sorry, Chair, if I'm allowed a second bite of the cherry. It was on the South Station question. I mean, yeah, obviously we need to discuss the 1.7 million, but can any of the officers give us some indication? Because my understanding is that the Cambridge South Station, in its macro sense, is not yet fully funded, and therefore, you know, there's a certain amount of casting around for contributions, and if that's the case, then we need to, you know, we need to be alive to that. But yeah, thank you.
Nikki, yes, go on.
It was just a really quick question on the residence parking schemes. There's a potential underspend of 120k listed. Presumably, for some schemes, they may not progress. Will that money go back into residence parking so that if in the future those schemes that haven't progressed those residents do decide they want residence parking, they can have it?
Right then, any more before I let Peter loose on these? No? Okay. Where you?
No, I was just saying that.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll try and go around them in the sort of order they were raised. A full-born scheme, we take the point and we'll make the amendments. In terms of the Oakington Travel Hub, Councillor Bates and I took an action to meet with Oakington Parish, which took us a bit of time, largely down to my diary to arrange. We've now met them, and it will be ultimately coming back to the Assembly, to the board, in terms of those considerations.
I understood that the Oakington Rural Travel Hub was also to serve Cottenham. Have you consulted with anyone in Cottenham?
So it wasn't a consultation, it was just clarification on the concerns that they raised. we will all recall the sort of conversation that took place in the meeting. So it was points of clarification, and also whether there were alternatives that would suffice. So that will all be presented when it comes back to the Joint Assembly and the board. England's Heartlands entirely agree. We work closely with colleagues at the County Council and colleagues at the Combined Authority to make sure that the messages are as clear as they possibly can be. Obviously, there are slightly different geographies in play, and so there's an element of filtering in terms of those messages, but we are working strongly on that. Greenways got the budget wrong. Actually, I don't think we did get the budget wrong. I think there was additional work given the engaged nature of some of our communities, and that there were an awful lot of feedback we received. And what we wanted to do was give ourselves the time to get it right, rather than necessarily chasing a sort of an exact budget line. Was the sort of decision that we took. Christopher's point, accept. So we will reflect on that. Cambridge South. So Cambridge South is currently, the development funding is in place of now just under £11 million. So Department for Transport have just put an additional £1 million in to continue to ensure that the scheme is being fast-tracked. It's currently at GRIP 2, and over the next 12 months the aim will be to get to a GRIP 3 position, which is the position just prior to going out for final procurement and getting a real understanding of the costs. The wider budget is not yet in place. You're correct to assert that, Councillor Topping. But part of this development work stream is to understand exactly what the funding options are, and that includes, in particular, rail fares themselves. So we need accurate assessments on what the usage will be on day one and on day year 30 in terms of that assessment, and that will be part of the final decision. But I remain confident that there's an awful lot of support at a national level for progressing that scheme. I hope I've covered all of it. Residence parking. Ultimately residence parking, that will go into the, obviously we will, following the gateway, there will be a sort of wider consideration on the next steps of the partnership scheme, and it will be for Joint Assembly members and for the board to take a decision on how the sort of the further phases of 200 million are spent. So in terms of highways advice, it is the Highways Authority are responsible for providing highways advice on planning applications. That's absolutely clear in law, and we are not in any way seeking to get in the way of that. We work very closely with Ian and his colleagues on that, so I can comfortably say that we sit in on pretty much most of the sort of the main talking points on that, and we will continue to work as closely as we can to achieve these things.
Yes, on that point, my understanding was that we were checking some of the legal niceties of the fact that given the Combined Authority is not a statutory consultee in the planning settlement, and I don't suppose the Greater Cambridge Partnership is either, that to what extent and with what powers can the County Council negotiate on behalf of either of these bodies to win section, if win is the right word, section 106 contributions towards their respective transport schemes. So it is quite a complex issue, but it's being worked on. Niamh, did you want to add anything else to all of that discussion on transport? Oh, Councillor Bates, thank you very much. Yes, that's much appreciated.
I was just going to add, in respect of the Combined Authority's consultation on local transport plan, there is a report going to the Environment and Economy and Environment Committee on the 19th of this month, and certainly there are members in this room, Noel, David, Tim and myself. It is now in the public domain, so if you want to spend a good couple of hours reading it, you're most entitled to it. But it will be the response from Cambridge County Council on their transport plan. Okay.
Thank you very much, which takes us very neatly into the economy and environment section. Are there any questions? Yes, I have one. John, William.
Yeah, thank you. It's about UK power networks, really. I mean, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, surely UK Power Networks has a duty to deliver the grid capacity, and is it a bit of a cheek that it is expecting us to subsidise its operations? I mean, we are paying for a study that surely it should be undertaking anyway, because it's clear that the current grid infrastructure hasn't the capacity to deal with the known developments, let alone those that are going to appear in the next 10, 20 years. You know, and I do feel that surely this is something that UK Power Network should be paying for itself as part of its duty of supplying electricity to our area.
Any more questions on the economy and environment? Rachel is quite keen to go in. Are you okay with that, Niamh? Yes.
So the Economy and Environment Working Group of Joint Assembly members and the board have been looking at this, and essentially it's about a timing issue. So this is the increase in the network that is required for development to bring forward that actually developers would need to pay for. So it's a phasing issue about how developers can't afford to pay for at the level that is required to put in place that additional grid capacity. So UK Power Networks would not fund that for the development coming forward. The developers need to pay it. This is about putting it in place and then claiming it back from the developers as they bring forward their development, rather than one of them having to take the hit on the whole cost. So it's not lost money, because it's about it being recovered as those developments come forward. And if somebody doesn't do that, then it's an inhibitor to growth, because that would get in the way of development coming forward at the pace in which we need to see it. Does that make sense? Doesn't look like it.
No, because I can understand through Section 106 the developer funding the physical grid infrastructure, but what we're doing is actually funding a study to identify where that grid infrastructure is needed. And surely that is a job of UK Power Networks, not of GCP. I could understand if GCP was funding the actual physical infrastructure to enable a development to go ahead, and then getting that money back from the developer through the Section 106. But we're actually, I think, paying for something that UK Power Networks should be paying for out of its profits.
Well, if the question is about the study, then we've already agreed to do that, and we have done that. So the moment has probably passed. So that's why I interpreted your question to be more about what the solution looked like. And certainly, when members looked at this, they felt that that was justifiable expense for as a body as we are set up to make sure that we are able to deliver growth and knock down any of those barriers to it. It felt that we needed to understand better what some of the limitations were on some of the development coming forward, and understanding it better and what needed to be put in place seemed like a good investment for City Deal funding to understand that, and then come forward with proposals about how to address that barrier to growth.
Thank you. Yes, I'll venture a comment on this as well. That I think a lot of it comes down to the legislation and regulations under which utilities operate, and they have no obligation to regard any planned development as actually in the pipeline until it actually has planning permission, and they have to think very quickly, but of course by then it's far too late. And of course they work to different forward planning cycles than local plan making does. And thirdly, I believe they are not allowed to spend money on infrastructure with prospectively, to anticipate developments on the way. So it's infuriating in all sorts of ways. And if I could go a little further, with your county council hat on, of course you're here as the county representative, I think, you'll be aware of what the Energy Investment Unit is doing at the county council, and I thoroughly commend that, which is one way of, for example, sidestepping the connection charge, which is barrier to significant renewable energy generation. So it's a win-win opportunity for the County Council to step in and make investments there which de-risk and open up development. So 3 cheers for the County Council there. Right, anything else on economy and environment? Oh, sorry, yes, thank you, Councillor Topping.
Well, it was just to say that, I mean, following up on that, I mean, I have some sympathy with John Williams' his point there, but the fact of the matter is that if we're in any discussions or debates with people like the Treasury, it's no good us saying, you know, we feel hard done by, because they only deal in facts and figures. And therefore it may be, as I think you've just indicated, Chair, that sometimes we have to swallow our annoyance at this and say, well, we are going to fund some research. And then we can put that research on the table and say to the utility companies or the relevant government department, in the same way that the research on the constraints of the A505 are being funded locally, so that, you know, we have the evidence and then we can go into bat with those facts and figures, which is the only thing that will sway central government departments. So I'm agreeing with you, Chair, that sometimes it's awkward, but we have to do it if we want to get traction. Thank you.
Yes, that's a very helpful observation, much appreciated, and I liked the way you made an analogy between this sort of work trotting along to the Treasury and the A505 work and trotting along to the Department for Transport. Very nice. Which leads us, have you concluded, Niamh? Yes, thank you. Which leads us on to you, Ian, Councillor Ian Manning. So if you would like to introduce yourself and your guest.
Sure, thank you, Chair. So I'm just going to very briefly explain the context of the report you're about to sort of comment on. So I have a role at the County Council. There's another 3 cheers for the County Council here. I have a role at the County Council as a member champion for evidence-informed policy. The primary responsibility of that is to provide political oversight for the Policy Challenges Programme, which is a collaboration between the County Council and an organisation called CUSP, or CUSP, depending on who you ask, it's pronounced different ways. But essentially it is a student-run early careers researchers organisation for people in multiple different disciplines who are interested in influencing public policy. So it's everyone from engineers, statisticians, social scientists, etc. And it is the Policy Challenges programme every year. We get a series of high-level policy challenges from members of the County Council, from officers of the County Council, and we match those up to volunteers from the CUSP's network as to what they're interested in. So it's very much a two-way process. It's not a commissioning thing where we say, here's the problem you have to look at and do this. We say, here's 8 or 9 problems, which ones are you interested in? And this year we had 2 policy challenge questions that were around climate change. And one of those and say thank you very much to the GCP officers here, because one of them we realised quite early on fitted much more closely with the GCP's aims and the County Council's aims, but there's been quite a lot of overlap between those teams. And that's the one you're going to hear from today. There is another one that has essentially calculated the carbon stored in Cambridgeshire. That's going to GPC, General Purposes Committee of the County Council, but the one you're going to hear from is talking about essentially the issue that the GCP is trying to tackle with. So if you have any questions after their presentation about the process of the policy challenges, or possibly next year, and whether GCP would like to have another one next year, please, I can try and handle those. All the technical stuff is for these guys, so I'll hand over to them.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Chair. Firstly, thank you very much for allowing us to be here and present in front of you. We really appreciate it. And I wanted to basically just introduce the reports that we wrote and allow an opportunity to answer any questions that you may have about it. So I'm Matteo Craglia, and this is Ingrid Elhelu, and we're PhD students in the engineering department who signed up to this student exchange with the local council to try and volunteering write an interesting report that perhaps could be of interest to members. So the aim of our report was to give an unbiased technical, scientific assessment of the levels of CO2 emissions and air pollution, specifically NOx emissions, in Cambridgeshire from transport. And to do this, we built a detailed scientific model that could quantify the CO2 emissions now in 2019 and how they might evolve into the future to 2050 under both a business as usual scenario, where there is no additional local policy intervention, and just purely with government intervention and technology as it changes in the future. And with this model, we're also then able to see the effect of various different policies. So the aim of our report is basically just to give an idea, put some numbers to different types of policies and see what has the biggest effect, how much of a challenge it might be to tackle air pollution and carbon emissions. So our report firstly revealed that 2019, we can expect CO2 emissions from Cambridgeshire from transport to be 1.6 megatons of CO2 emissions. And if we were to continue on a business as usual scenario to 2050, this would reduce by approximately 27%. Purely from technical improvement, vehicles becoming more efficient, and government stimulus. However, this 27% improvement is not hugely ambitious when it comes to tackling climate change. The council and the county have declared climate emergencies, and so more can be done at local council level and can be quite effective at helping to reduce carbon emissions. On the air pollution front, many members may be familiar with the VW emissions scandal, where vehicles produce more emissions than they say they do, and it turns out that actually that is the case across most types of vehicles. Produce more NOx air pollution emissions than their stated claims. So our report shows that the average vehicle in Cambridge produces between 200 and 300% more harmful NOx emissions than it says on the label. And past work has also shown that air pollution levels in the busiest roads in the city centre are above government legal limits. And our report shows that this problem is unlikely to solve itself, at least in the next decade, perhaps in the future, but urgent local policy intervention is also needed. So this is a problem. We have a problem both with CO2 emissions and with air pollution. So what we then did was look at various different case studies from various different cities around the world and countries, mostly in Europe, at different policies that have been effective at tackling both air pollution and carbon emissions. So in particular, we looked at congestion charging, clean air zones, strategic closures of roads, and other policies to do with increasing cycling, bus ridership, and the uptake of electric vehicles. And so we then detailed these in our report, and bring these together, we then use them to make two key recommendations that we think you might be interested in considering. The first is that by 2030, an aim that 60% of travel in Cambridgeshire ought to be on so-called sustainable modes. So both buses, walking, and cycling. This can be achieved both with policies such as clean air zones in the city centre, which have been proved highly effective at increasing bus ridership. So that's the first one. And however, not all travel within the county will be able to be shifted onto buses or will be able to be travelled by bike. So our second recommendation is that the council ought to aim for 60% of new sales of electric vehicles in 2030, new sales of vehicles in 2030 to be electric. So this is in line with government targets, but it also requires a fair amount of local policy help as well to help stimulate electric car sales. And if you like, we can go into that afterwards if you have any questions. So if you achieve these two targets, 60% of travel on sustainable modes by 2030 and 60% of new sales to be electric by 2030, you would already save 65% of carbon emissions compared to 2019 levels, which is a huge amount. And any reduction in carbon emissions is always particularly difficult to achieve. More can still be done, so these ought to be even seen as perhaps minimum targets, or coupled with additional other policies, particularly in terms of heavy-duty vehicles. But yeah, achieving these would have huge improvements both on the health of local constituents. It would reduce congestion, and yes, would have a good, stronger impact on the constituents in Cambridgeshire. So if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them, and thank you again.
Sorry, yes, very good. Yes, I'll be very interested in reading the whole paper. Yes, there was a link to something that I wasn't able to read. Is that right? Yes. I'm looking forward to reading that very much. So you'll have to excuse any ignorance that comes through in any questions that I ask on the basis of not having read it. But over to the rest of the Assembly. Any questions there? Yes. Dr. Wells.
Thank you for that. And I must admit I haven't yet had the chance to read the report, which I also look forward to doing. But I mean, there were just 2 or 3 points as I read the summary here and your comments. You made a comment about cars emit more than they're supposed to. But that doesn't mean there's any impropriety. You know, cars are tested under a testing protocol so that it's a completely consistent test, vehicle to vehicle, model to model, manufacturer to manufacturer, and in a sense, almost by definition, therefore, they're not tested under real-world conditions. When they operate under real-world conditions, their emissions will be different. I mean, this is not to say there hasn't been impropriety, but I'm just reacting to the, you know, they emit more than is on the sticker. They, you know, there's no reason why they would emit in real life what they emit under test conditions. And so I just think we should be clear on that. My other 2 comments are related, and that is, and I recognize I'm seeing here a summary, but I think an important principle of policy discussions is you describe the characteristics and not the technology. So I don't think we should talk about electric vehicles. I don't think we should talk about diesel vehicles. We should talk about vehicles with emission characteristics of the form A, B, and C, and an exemplar of A is an electric, but a hydrogen vehicle might meet those characteristics as well, or a vehicle powered by, you know, rubber bands wound up by human slaves, you know, somewhere. Human Slavery Act notwithstanding, you know, might also meet those tests. And technologies we have yet to envisage might meet those standards. So we should write policy statements in terms of performance characteristics. And we may well, of course, have a technology in mind that would deliver that at the moment, but we should not preclude other technologies that deliver the same performance characteristics. And I think that's a really important point, because the way you get innovation is someone saying, actually, electric vehicles are rubbish. I've got a much better way of doing it. And that's how you make the next technology leap in, you know, 10, 20, 30 years' time. So that's the general point. There's a follow-on then, which is I was just slightly uncomfortable about, and again, it may be because it's shorthand, I was slightly uncomfortable about the sustainable transport, the sustainable modes of transport. So you said buses, cycling, and walking. Trains, I would have thought, were. So again, it's defining buses is, if we're defining buses as sustainable, actually we should talk about what are the criteria to be defined as sustainable modes of transport, and buses and trains presumably pass that test because you've got very high aggregation of demand, so the per unit distance, emissions, impact, congestion is low per journey, per person. It's not that they're buses. it is, actually 747s are quite efficient in many ways in transporting people. They're actually more fuel efficient than most people's cars by a long way. So, I mean, again, it's what are the criteria by which it's sustainable? And walking and cycling actually address one set of performance criteria. Buses, trains, and other collective forms of transport actually meet a different set. So actually, and it goes slightly to Heather's comment earlier, actually, those two I see as rather different. They may both be, quote, sustainable, but they're very different in character. Not to say they don't deserve to be encouraged, but they have very different characteristics and implications.
Very interesting, yes. This is, yes, we are in Cambridge, and I fully appreciate a detailed academic discussion. So let's carry on for a little while, because I'll let you come back when we've had all the questions, if that's all right. John. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, first of all, can I say that I hope this has been submitted as evidence to the local transport plan and also to the joint local plan that's been developed by South Cambs and the city. We have to bear in mind that you're talking about 2030, which is 11 years away. So I think the chances of us finding an alternative to electricity to power our vehicles in that time, I think we have to accept that electricity for this purpose is the only energy in the room, in the game at the moment, and we need to ensure that our planning policies, both transport and strategic and local, reflect that. So we need to make sure that all our new homes have fast electric charging points. We need to make sure that going back to what we said earlier, that the grid is capable of delivering that, that all our buses are electric operated vehicles, and we are a long way from that happening within 11 years. And we've got to remember that 60% average across the county means that in our cities, and we only have two, Cambridge and Peterborough, that's got to be a hell of a lot higher than 60% to achieve that average. So I take on board what John said, but we've got 11 years, and we really have to stick with the known technology that we have at the moment to deliver that.
Yes, and are we going to be content with lithium-ion batteries for the whole of the next 11 years? Tim, this one.
I'd like to congratulate the two speakers for the initiative behind this. It seems really spot on what's on our minds as an organisation at the moment, and also to thank Ian for bringing it to us. I have two questions and a comment bound up with it. So I note that in the way you describe what you're doing, you're recognising two separate targets. One being reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and the other improving air quality. Now, to my mind, you've expressed it how it is, as I see it, that these are both imperatives for us. But what you've done here is to separate them out, which I think is really good. And I think that in some senses, we sometimes as a GCP are a bit lazy and speak as if the things are conflated. And I think as we're developing our policy in this area, it would be very helpful to have just a comment from you about whether the variables driving those two things we're trying to impact are also capable of being separate or are really part of the same thing, if you take my question. And the second question was actually not to you, but to Peter Blake, which is in the goal, you're translating this to one of them, 60% of travel in Cambridgeshire by 2030 ought to be on buses, cycling and walking, 40% from 2019, up from 40% in 2019. Is it possible, Peter, to relate that in any way to the goals that we as a GCP have already adopted, which is more about a 25% reduction in traffic on 2011 levels? Because the degree to which what you're saying is helpful to us, telling us whether we're on the right or the wrong track, will rely on that ability to translate what you're setting as goals, what we are. And of course, we have to note in that I think you're talking about the whole of Cambridgeshire, and we're talking about a smaller area of that. So I'd be very interested in comments on those 2 points, please.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I had Peter Topping first, and I'll come to you, Ian.
No, I thank you, Chair, but I think what Tim Bick has just set out deals with the question I have. Although I would, as a footnote, comment that we have 3 cities because Ely is technically a city, and I'm sure the mayor would take that view.
Yes. All right. Yes, Councillor Solomon.
My question is actually on the summary, so I don't know whether you wrote the summary or whether that was GCP officers summarised the report for us. But in 17.4, the statement's made that if we met those interim targets for 2030, annual CO2 emissions in 2050 would be 65% less than 2019 levels. So is that annual CO2 emissions for everything or just for transport? Just for transport. So, I mean, the national target, and it's been a target that's been adopted locally as well, and in some cases more ambitiously, but at least the national target is for net zero by 2050. So although the focus is obviously on the 2030 horizon, what additional do you need to get to net zero, or is that the limit, and do we need to look at sequestration and things like that in order to deal with the extra 45%?
Okay. Any more observations or comments or questions? Right then, I'll throw it back to you, Matteo, first, and then we'll come to Peter.
Thank you very much for asking all of your questions. I'll endeavour to try and tackle each one. Okay, so firstly, what Dr. Wells was saying. Test cycles, yes, have been found to be unrepresentative. The test cycles are found to be unrepresentative of vehicles. We raised this point in particular to show that, one, that motorized transport is in general a larger contributor to air pollution than other modes. In our report, we used the latest findings of remote sensing data from London to actually account for these, to be able to properly compare buses to cars to other modes, to basically bring it together and have a bit more of an accurate, but the point is well made. The technology neutral points, though, in that we ought to aim for vehicles with a certain emissions intensity, grams of CO2 per kilometre, for example, so therefore compare hydrogen vehicles to electric vehicles and not bias any particular type of technology. Unfortunately, time is running out. So I would heavily agree with Councillor Williams' comments in that we have very few years to tackle climate change anymore. And at the moment, the only realistic way, certainly for passenger cars, to reduce emissions are electric vehicles. For buses, the question is still between biofuels, if they have a certain can be ensured to be clean, and perhaps hydrogen, but again, that could take a huge amount of time to actually get up and running. At the moment, nowhere in the UK actually produces hydrogen en masse, huge amounts that are required to, while electricity is produced everywhere. It's already a technology we know. So, unfortunately, in certain cases, the needs to be technology neutral, unfortunately, we can no longer be so technology neutral. We have to push electric vehicles, and we wanted to make this recommendation in our report of policies specifically tackling electric vehicles, such as improving charging infrastructure, that perhaps are not so relevant for other technologies. There was a point that was made before by Ms. Richards about the 60% target of sustainable travel as to what shares of cycling and walking versus buses and how that might affect the results. We aimed to develop scenarios that would show the order of magnitude of these things, of how ambitious we have to be, but it is true that this should also be seen as a first analysis. The first time this has been done for Cambridgeshire, putting real numbers and evaluating different policies in their carbon reduction potentials. So yes, the share of walking to cycling to public transport could make a slight difference, but that could also be tackled, we recommend, perhaps in future work as well. To the point about, do you want to tackle this one? About air quality and CO2? The point that was made by, Councillor Vick about that air quality and CO2 emissions and congestion, arguably, are three separate problems, but often have the same solutions. And that's something we really try to emphasize in our report, is that, for example, shifting from diesel vehicles to electric buses tackles both air pollution and CO2 emissions. So they are separate problems, they have different stakeholders that are interested, and also phrasing it as different problems can build public interest in topics that perhaps people are not very interested in climate change, but they are more in air quality. And finally, when it came to the minimum targets, or the target of going to net zero for transport, we specifically looked at mostly at passenger transport, so we did not really look at freight transport. So our two recommendations would leave a 65% reduction in carbon emissions by 2050. 58% of the remaining emissions are from heavy-duty trucks, and there also, as there's another amount, that's light-duty vehicles. At the moment, technology-wise, we're a bit, there's no clear winner in terms of technology for heavy-duty trucks, but that's definitely scope for future work of how we can tackle that, both air pollution and CO2 emissions. And in terms of whether we need perhaps carbon sequestration, I would direct you to the second report that was written for this CUSP report that tackled all sectors, including agriculture and carbon sequestration and things to do with that. That will definitely be necessary if we are to get to net zero. I think I've tackled some things, but if you have any remaining questions, then...
Can I just say one thing? That our report was both quantitative and qualitative. So this was a project that was done over a 6-month period. We're not going to solve the problem of climate change, not in Cambridge, not in the UK or the world, but we looked at both case studies. So where do these policy recommendations come from? They're happening in other cities, like Manchester, Nottingham, London, Amsterdam. We focused on Europe, but these things are happening. The 60% modal shift is following what's happening in Manchester and what's happening in London. And obviously we can't exactly compare to London, but London has an even higher aim of 80% modal shift by 2040. So what we can model in our model that we developed in 3 months is these things of uptake of electric vehicles and modal shift from passenger vehicles to walking, cycling, and buses. And currently what we have in Cambridge are buses, so that's why we focused on buses, how we can improve the buses that are already here, because they're quite dirty, actually, and that's all covered in the report as well, that we don't only want the uptake of more passengers on buses, we need the buses to be cleaner as well, and a shift towards electric vehicles, and that we try to quantify in our model. But these are two policies that have to be part of a bigger policy agenda, because that's why we also looked at congestion charging, pollution charging, and clean air zones. We didn't model clean air zones because there's a report on it already for Cambridge. But we also saw that in Durham, when they applied a congestion charge that was £2.50 in Durham, that reduced congestion, that reduced improved emissions, reduced the number of cars passing the city center. There's a lot of proof in terms of what other cities around Europe have succeeded in doing in terms of improving congestion, which, yes, we can separate out air quality, CO2 emissions, and congestion, but they're interlinked at the end of the day. You reduce cars on the street, you increase the uptake of electric vehicles, that improves air quality. That reduces, if you shift to buses, that reduces congestion. You reduce cars on the street, you encourage people to cycle and walk instead of taking their car, that has an effect on CO2 emissions. So they are interlinked as much as we would like to separate them. Thank you.
Yes, we were just remembering our former transport director who was he was a very great champion of Durham, I think would be the best way of describing it. And Peter, you were invited to say how some of these recommendations match with some of those that we have been exploring at the Greater Cambridge Partnership.
So in picking up on the final points, at a very broad level, they clearly match. Members will recall that we've previously agreed to extend our scope from just congestion to air quality. So as part of that, we're doing some further work around air monitoring, building upon the clean air zone that we work with Cambridge City on. Because depending upon the assumption, if you go down an electric car route, that will clearly deliver benefits to the air, but not necessarily decongestion benefits per se. So there's a deal of further modelling which this piece of work will helpfully inform, that when we come forward with wider proposals, we will have that information to lay before members.
Could I just come back on that, Peter? So you talked about congestion and air quality, sort of the two of the three that the speakers were talking to us about, and you didn't talk about climate change and CO2. So I'm just wondering if you could remind us where that stands in relation to what we're currently trying to do. Is that a lower order of objective, or is that equal? Because we are earlier on in the papers making the point to the combined authority that they're not doing enough about climate change. And it sounds, when you miss it out like that, it sounds like we might have given it a lower priority ourselves, which would be a bit embarrassing.
No, it was more a slip of the tongue rather than missing out. So we agree that we started with congestion, that air quality and climate were key considerations that the Assembly and the Board wanted to be cognizant of in decisions. When we discussed it, though, we did recognise that the interventions had different impacts on those three things, and that you wouldn't necessarily have one intervention that naturally resolved all three. And so that was the piece of work that we took away to say what really are the options and what are the benefits in terms of decongestion, in terms of air quality or contribution to climate.
Right then, that's been a really interesting discussion, and I'm very grateful. Oh, sorry, Ian, yes, you want to sum up?
Yeah, I mean, just to stress that to the members that this is obviously a report that's been written in 6 months by people who came to this with essentially no sort of expertise in this area, which I think is brilliant of itself. But what I really wanted to stress is the Policy Challenges programme, we're very open to expanding it out to the city deal in more of a formal sense. This year it just sort of happened because of the work that was being done, and it ended up fitting in that way. So one of the things we're desperate to do is get more member involvement, and that could be members of the Assembly as much as the Executive Board, as well as officers, and actually suggest policy challenges. So, you know, we wouldn't want this to just go and that would be the report. We want to build on some of the recommendations in there and get more detail around them. So please do somehow, perhaps by you, Chair, we can sort out a way of doing that.
Yeah, no, as I say, I've really enjoyed this discussion. Perhaps a more broader and a more fundamental level of discussion than we often have at our meetings, but very much appreciated. And I'm very grateful to our two young researchers for their well, challenging us in quite a few ways, I think. So full marks for that, and thank you very much for taking the time to come and join us this afternoon. And to you, Ian, for you're the champion, I think, isn't that right? Yes, yeah. Full marks. Thank you very much. So, yeah. Right then, so we've had a little bit of furniture moving. I really don't think there's any need for me to sum up any of that discussion. We've given it a very significant chunk of our time. As you know, poor Niamh is often relegated to the last item on the agenda, and she gets very short shrift of about 5 minutes. Yes, Christopher Walkinshaw. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, just on that point, I would like to commend having this item at the beginning, because we had a proper discussion on the broader sense of the thing rather than diving straight into individual bits of detail. There were a number of topics that came up there that set direction for us, and I think that that has got to be good. I did have one quick question before Niamh relaxes too far. I think we're approaching the Gateway Review. I think we've all been involved in process. Just maybe 1 minute on where we are and how we feel about how that's going so far.
Niamh does have the detail, but just to say thank you for all of those that have been interviewed by the government's consultant. So that work has now concluded, and they will bring us a report on their findings in about a month's time. We also have a sort of complementary report to do, and that feeds into government in November. But obviously, government's a bit distracted by some things at the moment, so it's less easy to tell when that might come out of the sausage machine, so to speak. But it definitely won't be until early in the new year, I think, is our best guesstimate, really. Do you want to add anything? Or?
Other than just to say, with all the various things going on in central government that we don't have any control over, we have been staying close to civil servants on this and haven't yet been given any indication that anything has changed. So we will continue to have those conversations, but as of now, we remain on course as we were before the disruption.
Right then, yes, thank you. Yes, I too felt that was really good to have a general discussion at the beginning, and it sets the scene for us to move into one of the more particular projects that we're doing. So this is the Histon Road Bus Cycling and Walking Improvement Scheme. So we're going to start with some feedback from the Local Liaison Forum, then we're going to have questions that I referred to at the beginning. Then we're going to have Peter, I believe, giving us a response to the Local Liaison Forum and the public questions. He's then going to proceed to present the report, and then we will have our discussion. So I'll start by inviting Lillian Runblatt, who is the Vice Chair of the Histon Road Local Liaison Forum, to present the report of the meeting held on the 22nd of July. Thank you.
I better stand up to reach this one. So the meeting was then on July 22nd, and it was a major discussion then, divided in the design for the landscaping from WSP and the TRL consultation and the options for construction and management planning by Skanska. So the landscaping designed by WSP was not as detailed as anticipated by the forum. the number and size of trees, including roots and the heights and forms and things like that, they will be refined for each location at a later date. A full arboriculture survey is under completion and the findings to be implemented. However, a full biodiversity study has not been made. There were requests for hedgehog tunnels in the very long fence and additional trees in the front compared to the presentation. So at the end, it was proposed that consideration should be taken to residents' privacy and air pollution. Since then, residents have written to our MP asking for his intervention in the government. The TRO consultation had just been published and raised a few questions like Windsor Junction by Cope and will be one of the busiest junctions on the road, was lacking raised tables and no TRO was raised. The floating bus stop safety for both pedestrians and cyclists were questioned, and officers referred to the present Huntington Road experience with islands. The impact on pedestrians, cyclists, traffic and emission is available on request from the relevant authority. That's not very easily available information. We should have daily, like on A14 teams, we have daily reports of how the progress is worked on the road. And also we have a 10-day prediction already sent out on our mail accounts. We don't have to request it. So sent out, since the questions on lack of TRO for air pollution monitoring we have raised a question on that. They have also interfered with an LHI on consultation for Carisbrook Road. Now, the third one was the options for construction and management planning by Skanska. Oh, now it is called Histon Road Cycleway. Next time we may be Histon Road Greenways or something. The two options presented and discussed, they were 2.5-year construction period with both lanes opened at varied positional stages. They were considered impractical. So an 18 months full closure of the inbound lane during the length of the construction was the second choice. The residents can use their cars during the construction period and emergency vehicles have full access and the footpath and cycleways will be open. All shops will have access and the project manager will contact each individually. Great concerns were raised regarding the protection and noise reduction from the time when they removed the trees, the hedges between Brownlow and Blackwell Road until the new 3-meter high fence is erected. Harris fencing was proposed and assurance that security of properties will not be compromised by the works. There are worries by the residents. The buses, the guided buses and City 8 will be diverted down the busway and onto Milton Road, leaving residents without any bus service. Now, Gary Nicholas from Stagecourt confirmed that Stagecourt is investigating a loop service with smaller buses, and those buses are already available. But then if you are on certain parts of the road, you have to tour all the way up to King's Hedges to be able to go around, and there will be inconveniences in crossing the road, which are to be investigated too. So Histon Road, LLF anyway, supported the shorter 18 months proposal with a commitment that no nighttime HGV diversions were allowed. And I hope I can hold you account to that. Since the meeting, GCP and Skanska have changed the name. Like I said before, it's now called Histon Road Cycleways. You have a lot to do to reach to that standard for cycleways, both on the south and on the very much so on the north, with a 1.1 to 1.3 meter footpath and a 1.6 cycleway in some parts, compared to an added 3 meter car lane, are questionable. So, there was one more page to go, sorry. The lighting columns are too high and invites privacy, and the county council standards need to be changed. So it was proposed that the best course of action would be to lobby the Cambridge County Council, as the present standards have been questioned and will need revision. Eastern Victoria Huntington Road junction, there is no provision for cyclists in the middle of the junction. It will be reviewed. As this junction is the last part of the construction phase, further adjustments can be made. Kersbrook Road crossing, the Toucan crossing is not aligned for pedestrian cyclists crossing to Badminton Close, and that will be reviewed. But in the latest design, which is what we have today, it shows is some sort of beehive composition without explanation, just in the area which we have applied for protected space in the new local planning consultation. And we wonder how that agrees. The impact on Milton Road, use Huntington Road for diversion. Now, Huntington Road will be signposted for vehicles to avoid the works, and I guess that is because of the HGV diversions. So how will the Histon and Milton Road schemes work together? There is an overlap in the program, but two-way flows and bus lanes can be maintained along Milton Road, as it has 3 lanes. The cycleway on the outbound side is a two-way, therefore access is maintained. So at the closing of the LLF meeting, I announced that I will resign as Vice Chair. I'd like to give special thanks to Councillor Jocelyn Scott for assisting me during the meeting so professionally, and all the participants for their thoughts and local knowledge in improving the scheme. And I'm very grateful for their help. So, thank you. I'm now in opposition.
All right. Okay, so you can turn your microphone off just for a minute. But before I let you off, I'll just invite any members of the Assembly who have questions of clarification they would like to ask you. No, it seems not. Well, you'll be asking some questions on behalf of other members in a minute, Lillian, but certainly on behalf of the Greater Cambridge Partnership team up top here, I think we should express our thanks to you and for all that you've done as in the Vice Chair role. And we have heard quite a lot from you over the years, and you have done you've been quite an active Vice Chair. It's not just been a background role by any means. So well done, and thank you very much for all of that. So we then move on to the public questions. So I start with Anna Williams on behalf of Campcycle.
Yeah, I'm reading this question on behalf of Campcycle and our members, who currently number around 1,400 people. Campcycle welcomes the upcoming improvements to Histon Road. We thank officers for including a protected junction at Gilbert Road, and we strongly support effective continuous footway designs at side roads. Along with the removal of parked cars, the changes to this road will improve safety for those cycling or walking. However, we seek reassurance that this scheme is being built and considered in the context of a comprehensive cycle network that will connect all areas of the city and reach out to surrounding villages. We seek reassurance that the current levels of investment in cycling will continue after the end of this year. We seek reassurance that all cycle schemes are being planned with the aim of encouraging cycling for all, including unaccompanied child cyclists, those with larger cycles, those with disabilities, and those travelling to destinations other than work. We note that the Cambridge University Science and Policy Exchange study on reducing air pollution and congestion that we heard a bit about earlier recommends that walking, cycling and public transport make up a minimum of 60% of travel in Cambridgeshire in 2030. Evidence shows that to rapidly increase modal shift, isolated sections of high-quality cycle facilities will not be enough. The Greater Cambridge Partnership must continue to build high-quality cycling infrastructure, connecting it up to create a network suitable for all. Secondly, tackle dangerous junctions. 75% of collisions involving a cycle occur at junctions. And currently, the changes at King's Hedges Road and Victoria Road do not go far enough to improve actual and perceived safety for cyclists. And thirdly, implement bold demand management schemes to encourage people to switch away from driving. So CAMPSYCLE would like to ask the Joint Assembly to confirm that Histon Road is being considered as part of a comprehensive cycle network and that investment in cycling will continue at or above existing levels into the second tranche of City Deal funding. And just to clarify that point, by that we mean a percentage of the total investment in transport. So I believe it's 20% in tranche 1. So we'd be looking for the same or above in tranche 2. Thank you.
I don't think it would be appropriate for me to comment on that last request, but yes, it's definitely noted. Thank you. So we go on to Lillian, who's going to ask 2 questions on behalf of, well, the Histon Road Residents Association.
Air quality then. We start with air quality on Histon Road. A representation from HRR was noted in the TRO consultations without a reply. And it was a follow-up of the Executive Board decision on March 20, 2019 to introduce air pollution controls before, under and after the construction phase for the Histon Road project. The data should be displayed and easily available to the public. With only 1 month to go before the construction of the road starts, it seems logical that data and analysis should already be available. HRR requests that the before analysis be available regularly from now and on, and that information regarding the display of the data and where to find it is given to the public. And then we talked about the Histon Road Cycleway, which is the construction management plan. So HRI is well aware of the project like Histon Road will cause severe air and noise pollution during the construction period. On page 136 in the construction management plan, the hours of work are Monday, Friday, 7:30 to 18, Saturday working, 7:30 to 16, Monday, Sunday night work sometimes between 20 to 6 a.m., a time of carriageway resurfacing. See, GCP promises on 42 page, no night HDVs from A14 on Histon Road during the construction period. GCP has not proposed any TRO for speed limit, weight restrictions, ANPR, but contrary states there will be no restrictions on the outbound lane Histon Road. So during 1.5 years' time, we on Histon Road residents have experienced just how little the HGV drivers care to follow any signage used by highways. A14 diversion route starts at 21 at night and ends at 6 in the morning. It doesn't take much imagination to see that Histon Road residents will not have any longer periods for rest and sleep. This is a health issue. It must be taken seriously. So HRR requests GCP to guarantee that there will be no diversion nighttime traffic on his HGV traffic on Histon Road during the construction period, and suggests that automatic number plate recognition and APR be installed between Huntington Road to King's Hedges Road to discourage deviation from the designated diversion routes, which are M11 and A505. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good. Next is Judith Perry on behalf of the Penson Area Residents Association.
To the committee, you have before you in the agenda, pages 53 to 75, 9 detailed objections to the installation of double yellow lines on the southern stretch of Histon Road, loosely defined as the area between the Vauxhall dealership and the junction with Huntington Road. The office's comments to those objections, all identical, did not answer the detailed objections. The southern section of Histon Road is, for the local community, effectively a high street with local shops and houses built close to the carriageway, which have no driveways or off-street parking. The problems addressed by the Histon Road project arise only during the morning and evening peak hours 5 days a week. We do not object to the removal of parking during these times. However, we do object strongly to blanket unnecessary off-peak parking removal and are asking for a proper study of off-peak traffic, including the detrimental effects of its removal. No study or evidence has ever been presented which addresses specifically the off-peak traffic, which the community knows is light and flows freely, nor have the problems associated with the parking removal for the local community during those off-peak hours been adequately studied. In fact, the BENRA survey showed, for example, that weekend parking problems do already exist, and the temporary parking removal recently for resurfacing showed up parking problems in the whole BENRA area. The officers claim that adequate parking exists to compensate the 24/7 parking removal actually applies only during the peak hours. Removal of parking cannot reduce non-existing congestion in the off-peak hours, which it doesn't exist. However, there is a danger of attracting more traffic to the Histon Road, changing it from a quiet residential B road to a high-speed arterial road. Decreasing travel time for buses is only actually achievable during the peak hours. Difficulties for residents on Histon Road, Southern Histon Road, needing work done on their houses, physical damage to their houses from increased vibration, carers needing to park for an hour at a time, not just to be dropped off, all have not been addressed. There's a possible danger to cyclists with a double yellow line in off-peak hours, detailed in several of the objections, which has again not been addressed. Parking can be restricted during only peak times. That's amply demonstrated all over London and on Queen's Road, the backs, where parking is restricted only in the morning rush hour, and during the day parking is allowed, and Queen's Road carries much heavier traffic than Histon Road does. So we feel that no adequate justification has ever been presented for applying solutions to problems which exist for approximately 20 hours a week, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening, 5 days a week, to the area for 24/7. So we really request, is there actually any evidence that a problem exists that needs to be solved during the off-peak hours? And if there is no such problem in the off-peak hours, what justification is there for applying a solution which for the community is damaging in the off-peak hours?
Thank you very much. That was all very eloquently expressed and set out. Much appreciated. And then we have, is it Anna Crutchley?
That's right, yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Also from Benson Area Residents Association. On air quality, noise and vibration, of which we've heard a lot of interesting discussion this afternoon, and referring specifically to BENRA's objections to the TRO as on page 61 of this meeting's agenda. We left the last Histon Road LLF meeting in July with an unclear picture of how the environmental monitoring on Histon Road would be carried out, and we would like to follow up on this project and ask the GCP to provide us with more detailed information than in their stock response found on the agenda papers. We are particularly concerned about air quality, noise and vibration at the south end of Histon Road within the Benson area parking zone, covering numbers 1 to 135 Histon Road, terraced houses densely spaced, and whether the GCP so-called improvements will indeed make life better for those residents and businesses. Without any monitoring before the work is started, any so-called improvements cannot ever be measured or demonstrated, and monitoring later will not be able to be used to evaluate the benefit or detriment of the exercise. So our questions: could the GCP provide BENRA with details of the start and end dates of the monitoring before and after the rebuilding of Histon Road, the methodology, that is, will be employed, what the system will be for remedying any decrease in air quality or increase in noise and vibration after the improvements are completed? And following on from that, question 2, what is the future of the GCP after the Histon Road project is completed, i.e. who will be accountable for any failures in the GCP claims that the Histon Road project will improve the environment for local residents? Thank you.
Thank you very much for all those questions. Yes, if I could invite Judith and Lillian also to turn off your microphones, please. Your microphone, Lillian, is still on. Your microphone. Still on. Yeah. Thank you very much. That's great. So, Peter, if I could invite you to respond to Lillian, her feedback as Vice Chair, and also the questions, and then go on to the report.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll run through the sort of questions as they were raised. In terms of the issue around comprehensive network of cycling, then I'm happy to confirm that is the intention of the partnership. You'll note that the other report today is a cycle route on Madingley Road. There are plans for greenways that we will consider at our next meeting and beyond into the second phase of the spending for the city deal. In terms of the issues around air quality along Histon Road is already being measured. It's being measured by the City Council. That information is available, and we'll send those details out with the minutes of the meeting. There are 2 diffusion tubes on Histon Road, so that information is collected currently and will be compared post the scheme. So we will have a clear comparison on that basis. In addition, we agreed to put camera technology on there that is capable of differentiating between types of vehicles, including cyclists. So we'll have a clear comparison of traffic use. Those cameras are already on site, and we're in the process of calibrating them at the moment. In terms of Lilia's question around the construction plan and diversion route, so Histon Road is proposed to be closed on the inbound section, which means it's far less attractive for A14 traffic. Because in terms of the general traffic flows, and we currently don't intend, working with the highways colleagues, to put restrictions on, but we are putting cameras in, and we will continue to review and monitor during the period of the closure, and if things change, then with the County Council we will review that position. In terms of the issues around parking, I think every time I've introduced this report for the last 12 or 18 months, I've made clear the balance that we need to draw in terms of delivering public transport, cycling and landscaping improvements, and that needs to be balanced with the available space on the highway. And then on every occasion I've referenced the work that we need to do on parking and the challenges that proposes. Cyclists wish to use the road at all times, not just peak times, and parked vehicles inhibit the use of that road for cyclists. It is, as it's currently configured, it's not terribly attractive to cyclists to use that road. And as we heard earlier from the report from the students, there is a need to change that balance. So this is something in terms of the development of the scheme that we have thought about. We've done an awful lot of work in terms of the parking alternatives, but it is a balance and decision that the recommendations have taken on that. I touched upon the air quality issue previously. I think the outstanding point is around who will this be handed over to. So at the moment, the Greater Cambridge Partnership is a sort of 15-year project that will last until 2031. The assets will ultimately transfer to the Highway Authority, and that's why we work terribly closely with Ian and his colleagues in terms of delivering these issues.
Can I just ask again then, as I think Lillian towards the end in her report asked the question about how will the Histon and Milton Road schemes interact, and I thought that was quite an important point.
Sorry, Chair, that's a very important point. When these schemes were originally conceived, I think the intention was to simply flow from Histon Road construction into Milton Road construction. Yeah. I think where we're at following discussions with the local communities is we need to think very carefully whether that's still our plan, or whether, working with, again, Ian and Highways Authority, we want to pause between these two schemes, particularly reflecting how well the Histon construction has gone. And so, I mean, a point I should have raised earlier on is the dialogue continues, and we've committed to that. And one of the points will be, what about the construction plans for Milton Road? Do we need a pause, and do we need to create some separation between the two schemes? So I think that thinking has certainly evolved following discussions with the Liaison Forum and community members, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think other points will come out in the presentation and discussion, particularly the question as to whether the off-peak parking has been adequately addressed. But I'll now invite Peter to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just a few words by way of introduction. Members will, seeing the development of this scheme, recognise the significant growth in terms of scope and in terms of remit of what we're delivering on Histon Road. And that has in large part followed discussions with the local community that have said, we're not just interested in promoting bus services, but we are interested in cycling, we are interested in what that public environment looks like, and so the landscaping issue that Leila referred to has been very important. You'll also recall that the design you previously went through the Assembly and was agreed by the Executive Board at a previous meeting. And so what we're looking at here is just the final approval for construction. So in terms of what the Executive Board will be asked to consider, they will be asked to look at minor amendments to the landscaping strategy, because that has changed following discussions with local residents. And again, we confirm that those conversations will continue to take place around locations, particularly of trees. The report does outline the required approval for traffic regulation orders. We're very much working with the County Council in terms of their formal process to do this. The construction and management plan has always been a key consideration of this, and I think Lillian outlined the sort of views of the Liaison Forum when we took the options to them in terms of a longer closure period, but closed in sections, or actually closing all at once. And I think the steer from the Liaison Forum was the shorter period, and the report does outline some benefits of that. The Executive Board will be asked to approve the revised budget for the scheme that reflects the increase in size and scope, and that revised budget will be £10 million in terms of delivery in the scheme, and also that we will be working with the County Council and the approvals process on the Skanska as the framework contractor to deliver the scheme going forward. Just a couple of sort of comments in terms of because there's an awful lot of information available in the appendices around the traffic regulation order process and the comments around that, and also in paragraphs 317, particularly around, in addition to the views of the Liaison Forum, some of the reasons why a shorter construction period but closing the entire length of the road is preferable. But just to draw your attention to paragraph 3.18 particularly, which was the point that Lillian raised around bus services. So Stagecoach have indicated what their likely response would be to that, and it will have some implications for the communities along Histon Road in terms of access to bus services. So we are in discussions with Stagecoach about what an alternative provision may look like. Now, I'm not in a position, because we're not finalised those discussions, to put it in front of you today, but I certainly hope that we'll be in a position by the time we go to Executive Board to say, actually, we think there may be something that we could do around enhancing the bus service provision to ensure that there is no shortfall of bus provision along Histon Road. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, I think that means we throw it open to discussion by our members. Yes, I already have a couple of hands. If I could invite members to bear in mind, in particular, the 6 points at paragraph 1.4 on page 37, because they outline what the Executive Board is going to be requested to do in 3 weeks' time. Don't forget that this is towards the end of the process. We've had a lot of discussion already, so if I could steer you away from past ground, that would be appreciated. Right, okay, so I have Councillor Williams, then Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Solomon.
Thank you. Just once an observation and once a clarification. The observation is it's not just Histon Road that's affected by the diversion of the 8, it's also Victoria Road. So the diversion of the 8 affects a much larger area than just the area affected by the Histon Road work. So we need to bear that in mind. Clarification is, I see that the outbound, there will continue to be an outbound at all times. So in that case, are the bus diversions only inbound? Will Stagecoach continue to operate the 8 and the busway outbound via Histon Road? It's not clear.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll add up all these points and tackle them all together. So, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. My point is on the same section of the report. Paragraph 316 says that the construction and traffic management plan for Histon Road has been developed by Skanska in discussion with the County Council Streetworks team, but also engage with local councillors, the local liaison forum, local businesses and Stagecoach. Now, Histon Road in Cambridge City does not exist in a bubble. The City 8 actually is a very important bus route from Cottenham. It has its problems. It's not a perfect bus route, but it is used by people going to work, people going about their daily business. But the group I'm really concerned about are the students who attend Hills Road and Long Road sixth form colleges. I've already had one parent write to me who said she pays £600 a year for her daughter's bus pass, and the daughter has to get the bus at 7:04 in the morning. Now, if the bus is going to go admittedly on the busway, it may go a bit more quickly, but Milton Road is notorious for being congested. And also, I've spoken to councillors from other villages potentially affected by this, namely Milton, Histon, Milton and Waterbeach will be affected by the extra traffic on the Milton Road. Histon and Cottenham, we're affected by the bus going on an even more tortuous route than it does already, which is why most people don't like using it, but the students for Hills Road and Long Road have to. And I can't see that any discussion has been had with the people in Cottenham, and no provision has been made to discuss with the councillors in Cottenham so that we could discuss with our residents, and this has potentially massive impact on people just getting out of Cottenham to go to work every day. If a lot of people have to use their cars because the bus is not perfect, a lot of people use Histon Road to get to work. If they're made to go along the A14, which is being upgraded at the moment, so is also not a perfect solution, and then along Milton Road where there's congestion, what are the people in Cottenham meant to be doing to get to work? And to make a point about the sixth form, those students are a very important stage in their lives, and they won't get that time back again. Those are 2 years where they're under intense pressure working for their A-levels, and already the long journey from Cottenham into Hills Road and Long Road is quite difficult for them. And to make that already difficult journey even more difficult, I think just hasn't been taken into account. So I would like some assurance that future discussions with Stagecoach or with anyone else actually really make sure that there are solutions for those students trying to get to Hills Road and Long Road, because they do not have alternative sixth form colleges to go to.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very passionate. Just on local consultation, I should perhaps make clear that I, as one of the, as a county councillor for Cottenham and Willingham, I was consulted, and David Jenkins, as county councillor for Histon Impington, was consulted, and I did sound out Cottenham Parish Council, and we raised it at the meeting last week, and I haven't had any challenge to the preference for doing it, getting the pain out of the way as quickly as possible. But I accept that more widely we still have maybe some feedback to come. I just thought I should clarify that. Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Chair. I trust me, I don't want to open up all the design considerations, but a couple of things did jump out at me from the detailed design drawings. At the Gilbert Road, Warwick Road junction, just curious, I mean, we cyclists have given options there as to whether to go through the junction or to go around it on the dedicated cycle track. Just as you approach from the north, there are road markings on the design to say if you want to go straight on, go through the junction, that aren't matched by similar road markings for the cyclists as you approach from the south. So I just wondered if there was any particular reason for that on the detail. And then more broadly, just on these particular diagrams, I'm not quite sure whether the colours are right or whether I've got something wrong. The proposed trees are supposed to be in a blue outline, and I can't see that any of the trees are in a blue outline. And I know that some of the trees are proposed trees, so that's clearly wrong. And the reason that worries me is because the removed trees, existing trees to be removed, are supposed to be in a red outline. And if you look at the penultimate page of designs on the bottom end there, so we're getting out towards the A14, there's a whole series of trees that would be on the west side of the carriageway that are to be removed according to this plan for no apparent reason. I just wondered what the reason was, if they are indeed to be removed.
Thank you very much. Yes, Christopher.
Thank you, Chair. Mindful of what this report is in front of us for, I don't wish to go into any great detail on it other than to commend the team for the work they have done in consulting with a lot of people to get us to this stage, and I wish it well at the executive board level. And there's some interesting points raised, but one of those questions earlier and the report itself takes us to a more general point outside this specific one, which is, of course, that because of the nature of our roads around Cambridge, and no access onto Madingley Road southbound from the M11, Histon Road is actually effectively the western bypass for Cambridge, for anybody who lives north and east of Cambridge trying to get to the West Cambridge area. And something perhaps for us to bear in mind with other plans.
Right then, I hadn't ever thought of it as the western bypass, but now I'll not be able to get that image out of my head now. That's great. Yes, Tim.
I'm sorry, Chair, to sort of increase the list of questions, but TROs of any scope are used to being scrutinised in quite some detail, but through the GCP that process doesn't exist unless it's us. So I wanted to refer first of all to the removal of parking in the southern part of Histon Road, and to say that I absolutely get the benefit of doing that. I am a cyclist myself and absolutely understand the peril that occurs from dodging car doors opening and such like down the road. But I am quite sceptical about the actual practice of laying double yellow lines and assuming that we've solved the problem. The nearest example of this sort of scenario to me is on East Road, where in actual fact you have those conditions of double yellow lines, but actually add in a convenience store or two, a takeaway, and then maybe some housing, actually not present on East Road, then you have the almost continuous short-term presence of many vehicles, whether it's a window cleaner, a care worker, or a delivery van, or someone just nipping in to do their shopping. All of which is possible and happens continuously, although not with the same vehicles. And actually, because they're coming and going, the actual danger to cyclists is, to my mind, equivalent, because ducking in and out of several cars is a different challenge from staying out across a whole line of parked vehicles. So I think a lot of this rests on enforcement and the sense in which there will be an enforcement which makes this sort of restriction meaningful, because it's going to be quite an inconvenience to residents who I imagine are going to be the law-abiding parties to all of this, who probably will feel that they can't leave their cars parked there for any length of time and will have to find an alternative. But if they're to go through that pain, is there really going to be an enforcement which makes this restriction a really important and valid thing which does change the situation? In relation to the situation that will occur if we have been successful in stopping parking happening there, a number of contributions to the consultation ask about the consequences for speed that will arise on a stretch of road which is quite straight and will be then uncluttered, and people asking about the possibility of applying a 20-mile-an-hour limit down at least that stretch of road. And I'd be very keen to hear from the officers what their view of that is, and whether or at what stage that can be considered. It isn't the case, I'm pretty sure, that it's impossible to have a 20-mile-an-hour limit on a B road, because one already exists on Victoria Road, which I believe is also a B road. So conditions can exist for that to be overcome. In relation to the mitigation, I see from the consultation responses that there was a survey carried out about capacity in the Benson Road area, and that the survey says that it's okay, there is room, but then another survey was carried out by the Residents Association, which comes out to a different conclusion, having conducted their survey over a full 1-week cycle, particularly pointing to weekends which weren't surveyed at all by the GCP. And I'm just wondering whether we can have a comment on that, because it would obviously fit in very neatly to the GCP plans to say there was capacity, but there does seem to be, at least on the face of it, some conflicting evidence there. On another aspect of this, I wanted to welcome what I think is the case, that we're being promised a net gain in natural capital through these proposals. But I wanted to ask the question whether that gain, whether there is a solution and commitments necessary for that gain to be properly maintained over time, because we're very accustomed in the GCP to talk about the capital investment of creating that situation, but clearly when we're talking about natural capital in a highway environment, it also needs maintaining, and I wonder who and how that tab is going to be picked up. I'm wanting the answer to be good. And the final point I wanted to make was about the impact in the construction period of HGVs. Well, it appears that there is an impact of diverted HGVs on Histon Road already, and there is an impact on Huntingdon Road already, and it appears that traffic is somehow going to find itself diverted from one to the other to some degree over the construction period. And I know that others have been involved in trying to avert this diversion happening in practice along these roads, but if we're talking about that being doubled in its impact on Huntingdon Road, is this something that the GCP can involve itself with and see if it can lend itself with its expertise and resources to try and make that problem on Huntingdon Road, which may well result less bad than it might otherwise be?
Thank you very much. And yes, okay, I have Nikki first and then I'll come.
So a lot of what I was going to say, Tim has just said, but so I was going to ask about the parking issues. If, as what the Residents Association has said in their survey, it does deem that there isn't sufficient space, what can be done about that? And I was just going to mention the double yellow lines on Mill Road as well, so I won't bother going into that. And the other question I had was in regards to the landscaping. Can we not use edible plants and edible hedges at all? Can we use edible plants for hedgerows and things, just for hedging?
So once a roadside garden sort of thing. What a good idea, yes. I have quite strange images floating into my mind. Heather.
Just following on from the comment about the diversions that may end up going on to Huntington Road from the A14 works and the HGVs, I think it's worth pointing out as well that currently I think Milton Road is sharing a lot of those HD diversions as well, and seeing the ramifications in terms of particularly the vibrations and nighttime noise and et cetera. So what I would ask is that the GCP is looking at the knock-on effects of actually stopping that going along Histon Road during the construction period, and what impact that will have on Milton Road as well. And I think in particular, because if the next stage of construction is to do Milton Road, the residents along that particular area will have been long suffering, shall we say. And so going to Peter's comment about perhaps a pause in between construction, that may be welcome, just because there's going to be considerable disruption along that stretch, I imagine, if the no HGVs along Histon Road are going to have to go somewhere. And I imagine that Milton Road is going to see quite a lot of that.
Thank you very much. And Noel.
Yeah, Tim was mentioning the danger of the speed increasing on Histon Road following this, with the removal of the parked cars. And what I'd like to do is put in a request for speed indicator devices to be installed as the project is being finished off, because there are many of us across the city, in my division, who've been putting in applications for, the very stretched LHI funds, local highway improvement funds, to have these speed indicator devices fitted on roads which are subject to speeding motorists. And we're all fully aware that the police haven't got the resources to be actually tackling this major problem, particularly in 20-mile-an-hour areas. So I think at this stage, I'd like to sort of put down a strong request for these devices to be put in, and a strong request for solar-powered versions, because we have problems where they're battery-powered, where the batteries run down and have to get replaced. So that's part of an answer that Peter might have given.
Right then, any more contributions from members? Okay, I'll just sum them up briefly. Yes, John started off by pointing out that actually the City 8 doesn't just serve Histon Road in Cambridge, it also serves other roads in Cambridge, and Eileen went on to point out that actually the City 8 serves villages outside Cambridge, and those who use those services will be affected quite badly by the diversion that the City 8 service will have to suffer. Ian had some detailed design questions, which I'm sure Peter picked up. Christopher introduced this concept of Histon Road as the western bypass for Cambridge, which I thought was a very interesting allusion. Tim went into, I was very grateful that at least one member, and he was supported by Nikki afterwards, went into to this question of the parking restriction at the south end of Histon Road. Tim was anxious about enforcement because he felt that obviously the local residents would be the law-abiding ones, and possibly those from outside might flout it, and he wanted to be sure that residents didn't suffer by having the road outside their house occupied by people from outside without recourse. He then went on to the question of the fact that if you take the cars away, it does have the potential to make the road appear faster for those who are driving along it, and it was picked up by other members too. And Noel suggested there should be speed indicating signs before the problem was, to anticipate the problem, in other words, stop the problem from happening. You also touched, Tim, on the two parking surveys and the potential incompatibility between the two, the WSP one, 3 weekdays, and the one done by local residents, a 7-day, 24-hour survey, and you were invited to comment on that. You were anxious that it was a laudable aim to increase the number of trees and other vegetation, but how could we be sure that was going to be maintained? And you and indeed Heather pointed out that if HCVs are not using Histon Road, where else are they going to go? And can we do something to minimise the impact of those diversions on the roads to which they are diverted? Especially those residents of Milton Road who may then in turn suffer a disruption that may be coming to Histon Road. Nikki also made this appealing suggestion of having edible plants along the, which I quite liked the sound of that. I think I've captured everything that members wish to hear about. So Peter.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the bus services, we're still in discussions with Stagecoach about exactly where they're going to go, and we are cognizant and have had discussions with them about the college students. That's part of the reason that we're considering the approach on this.
But can someone please speak to the residents of Cottenham, because they feel like things are being done to them and they're not being involved or engaged?
We'll take that away, but there is a balance in terms of how many people we can talk to on delivering a scheme of this nature. So we are aware of the main thrust, which is why we're still in discussions with Stagecoach. The detailed design questions, I'll get you an answer to, Ian. Equally, Nikki, edible plants. So I'll take that away and I'll ask our consultants to come up with something clever on it. Double yellow lines and enforcement, that's a key issue, which is why we involve the County Council in these considerations. So we are working with them on that. Likewise, because they will ultimately be maintained both in terms of landscape and indeed the highway with the County Council, there are discussions that are ongoing with colleagues in terms of how we manage that to best effect. We're not going to put something in and then allow it to degrade, because that simply undermines the whole principle of what we're trying to achieve. We are looking at speed monitoring, so that will be picked up post scheme. There are a number of elements that we will wish to review. The parking will be one of those elements. In terms of the parking survey, we agree the WSP survey approach with residents before we undertook it. That's the information that we've provided in terms of the report, and we will continue to work with the community as we deliver the scheme. Diversion routes. So just in terms of, so our role is to deliver this scheme. We're in discussions with the County Council as the Highway Authority who manage the network, which is why we work closely with them in terms of coordinating with that. We're in discussions with Highways England around the A14 to manage this to best effect. But it is not the role for this partnership to engage in conversations around other traffic movements on Milton Road. That's the role for the County Council. We work with them and support them, but we are focused on delivering the Histon Road scheme.
Yes, I think that, as far as I'm concerned, I picked up that. Well, Lillian would quite like to raise another point.
I would come back to the AGV and how important it would be for our residents living along the road to have a good night's sleep when they have a full day working on the road going on. We have been in contact with Councillor Bates and Highways for 1.5 years. We have proposed several implementations of modern digital equipment which are not liked by the County Council, nor is the police interested because they always claim they don't have any resources. So we have to sort of match them together to come down to be on our side. We need to sleep at night if we are going to have a full day's work during the day along the road. The people will be suffering quite a lot.
Thank you very much. If you could turn your microphone off again. Yes, I mean, I don't usually invite public contributions during the discussion, but I felt that on this occasion it was quite in order to invite Lillian to come in again on that point. And she did mention you, Councillor Bates. Did you want to respond?
I think all I can say actually is that the County Council Street Works team are working closely with Greater Cambridge Partnership about where those diversions will be, where the restrictions might be, etc. So we are in dialogue with them, GCP, about all the issues which will come forward, and that includes obviously Stagecoach, about the routes, and what the diversions might be, and I'll pick up the point about that it's a wider area, fully understand that. Tim's gone. Maintenance, we're conscious because once you've left in 10 years' time, perhaps when something needs to happen, so we are in discussion in respect about maintenance, ongoing maintenance. That will also apply, remember, to the Combined Authority as well. Okay, so if they do schemes in the long term, like the discussions that we're having with Highways England, because Highways England, when they finish doing the A14, will inherit about 22 kilometres of roads which will be gifted back to the county. We are in discussions with them about our inheritance, I would describe it as. Okay, so we are working closely with the GCP on all the issues which have been raised today, and I'm here and I'm listening to what people have been saying. HGVs, yes, it's a problem. It's a problem in my village, indeed. Okay, it's a problem in lots of villages. It is not an easy issue to address or solve. One of the big issues that people say is if you stop the HGVs coming down my road through my village, they go into the next village, and the next village doesn't like that either. So it is not an easy issue in respect of HGV movements at all, and that also comes really down to the minerals and waste plan, because most of the lorries are connected to minerals and waste, okay, and that is out for consultation at the moment. So those are certainly live issues in respect to that. But I can reassure you that we are engaging with GCP on all the issues which have been raised.
Right then, thank you. Oh, Lillian, you're stretching my patience. We've gone a long time. Very, very sure. All right, go on, go on.
No? Okay. Ask Councillor Bates then. Are all those roads only affected by full daytime work as well as the detours at night?
Okay.
I don't think they are.
Okay, thank you very much, Lillian. If you turn the microphone off again now. Right, members, I didn't pick up any strong objections to any of the 6 points outlined at paragraph 1.4. So with the given that both Ian Bates as the Executive Board member and Peter and Rachel as the officers have heard all the discussion, I'm certain that they'll pass all that material into the Executive Board consideration of the item. So, good. We move on now to item 8. Madingley Road Cycle and Walking Project. So, again, we're going to start with the public question. We're going to hear the officer's response to the question. We're going to have Peter explain the report to us, and then we're going to have our discussion. So if I could start by introducing Karen Ayuvima. Yes, thank you.
Disclaimer. Yes. Hi, so I'm Secretary of the Madingley Road Area Residents Association. I'd like to thank the officers and Paul Owens in particular and his team for working on this project, that's working on the project, for just how much they've included us residents along Madingley Road and listening to our comments during the pre-consultation phase and the speed at which it seems to be progressing. We realize we're at the very start of this project and it's quite scary to listen to what comes at the end of them, but I think it will be good. But we have a few questions as the Resident Association on the options that are described in the agenda. They mainly relate to the safety and the ease of use of the proposed cycle paths. So option 1 includes long sections of cycle path right next to the roadway with separation by the so-called Cambridge curb. How will vehicles be kept from using the cycle lane as a loading bay or waiting area? On our current shared use paths, we've had sort of contractors and stuff parked in there for weeks on end, so it just is an obvious question. For both options, is there scope for adding another crossing in the section between Astronomy and Grange Road? Right now, the shared use paths are basically bi-directional on both sides. In the proposed options, it'll be only in one direction on the south side and possibly 2 directions on the north side. So we need a lot of crossing points for it to be useful for people to actually cycle. The additional crossing point would also help get people to the bus stops that are in that area. Right now, it's actually quite hard for people to cross in busy traffic to the bus stops that are already there. Is there any scope to improve the design at the very east end of the road? It looks where it empties onto Northampton Street. It looks pretty much unchanged, and that seems to be a bit of a missed opportunity because there's a lot of traffic there all day. One of the questions that was forwarded to me was, will the design be future-proofing for electric bikes? The options both put forward a consistent 30-mile-an-hour speed limit along the length of Madingley Road, and that's very welcomed. But especially for option 1, would there be any scope to even lower that further, given that a lot of the cycle path is right next to the road, and we get a lot of buses and trucks along there? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and if you could turn your microphone off, please. Thank you. Right, so Peter, there's quite a lot of questions in that one.
Well, I mean, thank you, Chair. And I suppose my answer is that's exactly why we need to consult. So we need to understand what are the infrastructure options that we've got, how do we balance that with the available space. We recognise that the East End is particularly constrained, so do we approach landowners and see whether we can widen that, would give us more opportunities. What do we need to do about traffic regulation orders? But you've just heard the balance that we need to draw in terms of taking those forward. So that's exactly why now we've had the pre-engagement, we need to go out and really get under the skin of this as a scheme and say what options have we got, and then what did the local communities think about them.
Right then. Okay, Peter, well, if you can go into the report and take us through it.
Well, I mean, thank you, Chair. I actually don't plan on saying a great deal more than that, other than we've taken quite a bit of learning from our earlier schemes. So in terms of Milton Road, Histon Road, and what we've done with this scheme is we've sat down with local stakeholders first. And we've talked through what the challenges and issues are. We've then come up with a couple of options. So we've held a pre-consultation stage. So we will now go out to consultation. We will ensure get a whole host of questions and views on those infrastructure issues or regulation order issues and the like. But I think because we've held a whole series of workshops and meetings, we've hopefully provided quite a deal of reassurance to local residents, communities, and actually set this up for a good consultation that we'd like to kick off in the near future. Thank you, Chair.
Right then, members, over to you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you. It's not clear from the diagrams that we've got where the new bus stops are. I think I can make out a couple of floating bus stops. But the bus stop that's currently outside the Park and Ride going east seems to have just disappeared. It's on a cycle, it's part of the cycle path on option 2, but it's not shown at all on option 1. I mean, it's just that it would have been very useful to have marked out the bus stops to compare where they are at the moment and see how easy they are to access by pedestrians across the cycle path. But, as I say, they're not clearly marked on the diagrams.
Thank you very much. I have Mr. Walkinshaw, and then I'll have you.
Thank you. Just a quick one. It's a bit like the last one, a more general point that comes out of it. In 3.5, we talk about the fact that we're going to have to compromise this scheme because we have to take big boats through there because a bridge somewhere else isn't quite tall enough. How many schemes will we end up compromising before we have a conversation about fixing the actual problem, rather than bring these huge loads through the centre of town? I know what the problem is, but here we are planning to compromise something rather than fix the real problem.
Yes, okay, and Tim?
Primarily wanted just to pick up Peter's own comment about the process to get to this point with stakeholders and residents and so on. I too have picked up very positive feedback about the process that has been followed on this occasion, and I think kind of there's plenty of people coming along telling us that we get the process wrong, but it's worth making a mark in our memories about when we get things right so that we can adopt similar formulae again. The trouble with these reports at this stage is that it's tempting to get immersed into the detail, but actually the point is this the detail that we want to ask for residents and other stakeholders' input on? And as I see it, there are two good options. There's a further version, minor extra version of one of them. It looks a very interesting selection of options, and I personally think it's so far a good piece of work, and the answer ought to be yes.
Right then. Councillor Topping, yeah.
No, just to say, I also think that it looks like a promising start, and certainly that route is not an easy one to. It does sort of stop and start. There are lots of bits where you're not entirely sure if you're cycling where you should be, but I do hope that we'll be able to keep the attractiveness for pedestrians, because you do see a lot of people, walking along that route, and it is a particularly green avenue or entrance into Cambridge. We need to hang on to that, but it's a good start.
Thank you very much. Ian, Solomon?
Yeah, I would concur with the points of the last two speakers. Just as it goes forward to consultation, I would imagine that the users or a key user demographic will be the students, so timing the consultation and maybe even having some special events, because I don't imagine that the students pay a lot of attention to local consultations. So if we could target what the students think, I think it'd be useful input, actually.
Dr. Wells?
Thank you, Chair. Again, I think the very early consultation to get some early options out is a very good step. I entirely agree with that. What I didn't see in the paper, one thought was that at least for the cyclists, what I think of as the Coton Footpath Adams Road route runs really quite close to the south of this. And so there's no mention in the paper of thinking of those two in some way as coupled, because for cyclists, so I suppose what I'm thinking is, if you are working at, I don't know, British Antarctic Survey, so at the north, just to the south of Madingley Road, do we think their primary cycle route into town is by crossing the Madingley Road to get on the north side to go into town, or is it to go south onto the Coton Footpath and there? So I think there is perhaps some interplay between those two routes for cyclists, because in cycling terms they're really quite close together. I would accept for pedestrians it's probably a bridge too far. So I just think a little bit of thought about that, rather than have lots and lots of crossings which could be avoided by directing cycle traffic to the south, perhaps. The third and very minor point is on the cross-sections. I hope we're receiving some royalties from Audi, given that they appear to have a branded product on all the cross-sections.
Right then, anyone else? Noel?
No, it's just very quick. 3.7, you've got the estimate there, 5 million to 8 million. I can understand why, but it seems to be quite a broad range there for an estimate. And then so rattling in the back of my mind was the mention earlier of the Histon costs going up to 10 million. So I'm just wondering if you're confident in that kind of estimate at this early stage. It's broad and it's...
So just to do that initially, then we need to give a sense of what it is, but clearly we need to go out and consult and start to refine the process. So all that is a ballpark estimate. When we've gone through the consultation and this comes back with something that we can design in detail, we can produce far firmer costs. That's where we're at. I mean, in terms of bus stops, we'll make sure they're clearly outlined, John, in terms of the paper. Students, yes, absolutely right. As is the network point, and we are cognizant of that, and we need to flesh that out when we go to the design issues.
There was that point that Christopher raised about how many times do we have to compromise for constraints before we tackle the constraints themselves? Do you want to have a go at that one? Or?
We note the comment. We're not the Strategic Transport Authority in terms of building very, very large highway schemes, but we note the comment.
Yes, but generally speaking, I think the message there was so far so good. Proceed, and no one had anything to challenge at the 3 points on paragraph 1.4 on page 156. So I think we pass it on to the Executive Board for its good offices. And that concludes that item, brings us to the date of the next meeting. Now, don't all jump and put your papers together, because this is perhaps not going to be a straightforward item. I know it's due to take place on the 21st of November at South Cambridge Hall, but bear in mind, today we were scheduled to talk about Camborne to Cambridge, and we've taken 2 3/4 hours. Now, we did give a very good hearing to the quarterly progress report, which I strongly commend. But if I could take you all back to page 33 of the agenda, and you look at the list of items going to the Executive Board on the 12th of December, you'll see City Access, Greenways, West Cambridge Package, Camborne to Cambridge, A10, Eastern Access, as well as the GCP Quarterly Progress Report. So, we have been agonising as to precisely how we tackle this, because obviously we're scheduled to meet at 2 o'clock. And if we have all those items, and if we were to give them the sort of depth of consideration, and by the way, I commend the depth of consideration that our committee gives these items. To me, it's a positive fillip to the Joint Assembly that we do give very, very close scrutiny to these items. But we are thinking that perhaps starting at 2 o'clock might be leaving it a little late in the day. So I'm getting quite a few nods around the table. I mean, we haven't had a whole day meeting yet. Yes. Yes. You see, what we've sort of been thinking is that if we started at 2 and had a break for tea, that tea is a much less well-defined meal than lunch. So if we were to start at 10 o'clock in the morning and break for lunch, that lunch is a much more tangible thing, and we could have a start time and a finish time for lunch, and so those coming for what we would hope to schedule as the afternoon items would have a clearer understanding of when to turn up. I'm getting quite a few nods around the table. We've lost a couple of members and we have a couple of absentees, so I don't want to set anything in stone right now. Yes, John.
I think an added thing against an afternoon and evening is, of course, South Cambs is locked up at 8 o'clock.
Yes, I have found that quite useful in the past, actually. It was very, I won't go into detail, but it was actually extremely useful to know that South Cambs Hall was due to be locked up at 8 o'clock. Right, thank you very much for that helpful piece of advice. I think we're going to take soundings then of members, because obviously we don't want to clash with any other scheduled meetings apart from anything else, but I'm not getting any expressions of outrage about the potential of meeting starting at 10 o'clock in the morning and then having lunch and having an afternoon too. So it's on that basis that I'm going to take that away and work on it. Yes, all right. Okay, thank you very much, members, and thank you very much again for all your contributions this afternoon. Very much appreciated. I'll close the meeting about 4:45 and safe journeys home. Thank you.